I woke up to sunlight and silence, the kind that feels heavy, final, like someone walked out mid-sentence and left the door open behind them. The sheets beside me were still warm, just barely, a dent in the pillow where his head had been, no note, no goodbye, no trace of him except his jacket, black leather, heavy, expensive, carelessly draped across the armchair like it belonged there, like he did. I sat up slowly, pressing the heels of my hands to my eyes. Don't do this, Ella, don't make it mean more than it was. It was just a night, a stupid, reckless, tequila-sweetened mistake wrapped in a perfect body and a voice that made promises he never intended to keep, except, he hadn't said anything, had he? Not really. It had been a look, a touch, the way his hands slid up the back of my thigh while we stood barefoot in the surf, like he already knew what I'd say before I said it, the way I didn't say no, not because I trusted him, because I didn't trust myself. I told myself I could be that girl, the one who could separate pleasure from meaning. I'm not that girl, never have been. But last night, God, it felt like something, the kind of something I've spent the last 2 years pretending I no longer want. I threw the covers off and walked barefoot to the window. Outside, the beach was already awake, couples holding coffee and walking in silence, the kind that only comes with comfort, with time. I hated how much I envied that. He hadn't even stayed for coffee. I spotted my dress crumpled at the foot of the bed. I stepped over it, pulled open the closet door. Still his jacket, still there, and like a fool, I ran my fingers across the shoulder seam like it might tell me something. I should have thrown it out, left it at the front desk with a cold little note. You forgot this. Instead, I hugged it to my chest like it was still warm, still his. Then I let out a breath. No tears, no breakdown. That wasn't me anymore. I was smarter now, colder. I knew how these stories ended, and they never start with a man disappearing before sunrise. I tossed the jacket over the back of the same chair it had been left on, picked up my phone, scanned for a message. Nothing. It didn't sting, not really, just a tiny ache. In a part of me I thought I'd closed off for good. I shut the window, turned away from the bed. Whatever last night was, it ended before the sun came up. It was just one night. That's all. This is fine. I can handle this. The elevator doors slid open, and the hush of the executive floor wrapped around me like cold air. Sleek glass walls, polished concrete, sharp edges and expensive silence. I clutched my portfolio tighter. My heels clicked too loudly, too confident, too fake. This job was everything I wanted. A fresh start, a promotion, a new city, a chance to be the version of myself that didn't fall into bed with strangers on vacation. Especially not ones who disappear before sunrise. Especially not ones who. I stepped into the boardroom, and the world cracked. Max was standing at the head of the table, navy suit, no smile, same eyes. My heart stopped, or maybe it sprinted. His mouth twitched. Not a smirk, not quite a frown. Recognition flashed in his eyes, brief as lightning, and then gone. Professional, unbothered, like I was just another new hire and not the woman he'd kissed breathless on a balcony 2 nights ago. He said, "Welcome to Kane Enterprises," like he'd never seen me naked, and I said, "Thank you," like I didn't still have his jacket hanging over my chair. "This is fine, I can handle this, right?" He didn't look at me once, not during the meeting, not when I introduced myself to the team, not even when I handed him the quarterly projections he asked for in that cool, clipped tone that made my skin tighten like a pulled thread. Max Kane, CEO, not Max from the balcony, not Max whose hands had slid beneath the hem of my dress, whose voice had gone rough when he whispered my name. I stood across from him in the conference room, pretending to take notes, pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. "This is fine," I muttered under my breath, pen scribbling nonsense. "I can handle this, Cassie, the woman seated beside me, glossy bob, kind smile, leaned in. "Nothing," I said quickly, offering a too bright smile. But she was watching me, curious, perceptive, the way women are when they've seen enough to read between the lines. Later, in the hallway, I passed him again, brushed shoulders, no words, no glance, just static. What we don't say sometimes screams the loudest, and God, the silence between us was deafening. The office is quieter at night, still, sterile, humming with the kind of silence that presses on your skin. I stayed late because I had work to finish. That's what I told myself, over and over, but the truth was colder than the glass walls around me. I didn't want to run into Max again, not with witnesses. Now, the building was mostly dark except for the pool of light spilling from my office and the thin sliver coming from his. I could see him through the glass, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up, forearms tense, head bent over something on his desk. He looked human, not the man who'd ignored me in the hallway, not the CEO with clipped commands and sharp gazes, just Max. From the balcony, from the bed, my stomach twisted. I tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of me, but the numbers blurred. I looked up, he was watching me, only for a second. Our eyes met, and then his snapped away. He stood, walked to his door, and closed it without a word. That was the thing about glass walls. You could see through them, but they didn't make you any closer, just more exposed. And suddenly, I felt raw, stupid for hoping, for looking. His door was shut now, locked, maybe, and mine might as well have been too. I wasn't planning to open that box. But there it was, sitting at the bottom like a silent reminder, Max's jacket. The black leather, worn just enough to be soft, but still smelling faintly of him. It wasn't mine, not really, yet somehow, I'd never given it back. Fingers brushing the sleeve, I felt a flicker of something I tried hard to deny, nostalgia, or maybe weakness. The night at the beach resort was still fresh in my mind, the heat of his hands, the way the world had shrunk down to just us. I folded the jacket over my chair, draping it as if it could shield me from the mess I was trying to avoid. It was more than fabric, it was the weight of everything I didn't want to admit, because I had convinced myself it was just a fling, a mistake, a single night that didn't mean anything. But every time I caught its shadow in the corner of the room, I was reminded how much I'd lied to myself. That jacket held the echo of his voice, the press of his body against mine. It held the space where my walls cracked, even if just for a moment. I wasn't ready to let go, and maybe, deep down, I didn't want to. It was a quiet kind of weakness, not the kind I'd brag about, but it was real, like the unspoken promise between us, tangled up in leather and longing. I ran my hand over the collar again, wondering if holding on was the same as being brave, or if maybe it was just fear dressed up in a familiar shape. I didn't mean to order his coffee. It just slipped out, almond milk flat white, no foam, 1 sugar. Before I realized what I was saying, my voice had gone on autopilot, but my chest clenched. The second the words left my mouth, the barista repeated it back, and I just nodded, too tired to explain, too unwilling to admit out loud that I still remembered his order better than my own. The walk back to the office felt longer than usual. The 2 cups in the cardboard tray felt heavier, one for me, one for the man I wasn't supposed to care about. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, I hesitated. He wasn't in his office, the lights were off. But that didn't mean he wouldn't walk in any second. I stood in the hallway, just outside his door, staring at the coffee cup like it was a live wire. 1 step closer and I could leave it on his desk, a simple gesture, no words, no expectations. But I didn't move. I thought of the way he avoided my eyes that night we stayed late, how he turned away when I caught him looking. I thought of the pastry I'd handed him and the way he'd taken it like it burned. I turned, walked to my desk, and drank his coffee instead. It was too sweet, and yet I drank every drop, because maybe that's the kind of person I am. Someone who wants to reach out but keeps pulling her hand back at the last second. Almosts, near misses. That's all we were now, and maybe that's all we'd ever be. I should be over it by now. But some bruises don't fade, they just sink deeper, where no one can see. The office was still, late again. Too quiet, too still. My coffee had gone cold. I stared at the blank document on my screen, fingers hovering uselessly above the keyboard, and suddenly, it wasn't Max I saw in my mind's eye. It was Daniel, his voice, the fake softness in it when he'd said my name like I was the one breaking something. Not him, not the way he had looked at her. They'd been laughing by the printer. Stupid, careless. I hadn't even been looking for signs. That's what trust does, doesn't it? It blinds you, makes you miss the way his smile lingers too long on someone else's mouth. He told me it meant nothing, that it was a moment of weakness. I almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. The script men rehearse when they don't expect consequences. But I'd learned mine. Never again, I told myself. Never love where you work, never let someone that close. And then Max happened. One night. One mistake I couldn't stop remembering, the taste of him still lived somewhere on my lips, even after all this time. His coffee order, his jacket. The way his eyes found mine in glass reflections before he looked away. It was starting again, that slow, terrifying unraveling. And I hated that it wasn't just physical anymore. That part scared me most, because I knew how it ended when feelings snuck in, with betrayal, with silence, with a woman left wondering if she'd ever been enough. You'll get soaked. His voice came from behind me, low and even, but I still flinched. I hadn't realized how close he was. I hadn't realized how hard it was raining until I looked out the glass doors again. Sheets of water poured from the sky, relentless, drowning the city in silver. I swallowed. I'll manage. Max didn't move, didn't push, just stood there, tall, still, a quiet presence that had started to feel like its own kind of storm. "I'll drive you." I should have said no. Every part of me screamed for distance, but instead, I nodded, too tired, too exposed, maybe just too curious. The ride was silent, tense. His car smelled faintly of leather and the same cologne he'd worn that night. Warm, expensive, sharp. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, pretending the air between us wasn't charged like the sky outside. He didn't look at me, but I could feel him. The energy in him coiled like he was holding back something big, like he was seconds from saying something that would change everything. But he didn't. He pulled up in front of my building. The rain hit the windshield like static, and still, silence. I reached for the door handle, hesitated. "Thanks." He nodded once, jaw tight, his knuckles flexed on the steering wheel. "Ella." My name in his voice cracked something in me. I looked at him, but he didn't finish the sentence. Just that, my name, hanging there like it meant more than he could admit. I stepped out into the rain, let it hide the heat in my cheeks, let it wash away what he almost said, and what I almost let myself feel. I didn't think it would still be haunting me. Cassie looked up from her drink, brows lifting. "Haunting you how?" I stirred my tea even though it had already gone cold, the spoon clinking quietly against porcelain. We were sitting in the corner of our favorite coffee shop, dimly lit and mostly empty, just the hum of distant conversations and the soft hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. I should have stayed silent. I'd almost made it through the whole conversation without saying anything real, but something about the rain still clinging to my coat, or the way Max had said my name like it meant something last night, had cracked something open. "It was just one night," I said carefully, eyes on the swirl of milk in my cup. "But it's been weeks, and I can't stop thinking about it, about him." Cassie's gaze sharpened, but she stayed quiet. She always did, knowing I hated being pushed. "It wasn't supposed to mean anything," I continued, quieter now. "But it did, and I can't decide if I'm more scared of that, or of how badly I want it to mean something." Still no name, still no details, but she leaned in like she already knew this was more than a passing confession. "Do you regret it?" she asked, voice soft. I exhaled. "No," I whispered. "That's the worst part, I don't." She nodded, slow. "Then maybe it wasn't just a fling." I looked away, throat tight. I didn't tell her he was my boss. I didn't tell her I see him every day, and it's getting harder to pretend I don't care. But I think she knew, and deep down, so did I. He laughed, not the polite, boardroom chuckle I'd seen him give clients, not the forced, closed-mouth kind meant to end conversations, but a real one, deep, low, completely unguarded. I froze halfway past the glass-walled conference room, one hand still clutching a file I didn't really need. Inside, Max leaned back in his chair, head tilted slightly, eyes crinkled at the corners as he looked at his assistant, Mia, who was smirking like she'd just delivered the punchline of a joke she knew he'd appreciate. It was strange, disarming. He looked human, not the man who stared at me across the office with unreadable eyes, not the one who had kissed me like he was drowning, then put up walls taller than the damn building we worked in. This version of him, laughing, relaxed. It was someone I hadn't met, or maybe I had, once, tangled in white sheets and summer heat, and I hated how much I missed that man. I stepped back before either of them could see me, my heart suddenly too loud. The hallway felt colder now, fluorescent lights humming above, the air too thin. He's not just my boss. He's not just the man who made my body forget how to breathe. He's more. That should have made things simpler. Instead, it twisted everything tighter. Because now I couldn't cling to the idea that he was just cold, just closed off, that this thing between us was just lust, misplaced and brief. He had layers, and I'd seen one, and worse. I wanted to see more. The kitchen was almost too quiet, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of the fluorescent light above. It was early, too early for most of the office, but I knew his schedule by now. He liked his coffee black, no sugar, pastry, almond croissant, if there was one. I stared at the flaky golden triangle in the paper bag I held, my fingers pressing creases into the paper as I stood in the doorway. This was stupid. He probably wouldn't even notice. Or worse, he'd notice and look at me the way he had yesterday, like I was a line he didn't want to cross, like I was just one more complication in his already too structured world. But I'd seen him laugh. Not the stiff, formal smile he wore in meetings, a real laugh, soft, crinkling the corners of his eyes. That version of him, the one Mia had coaxed out, had done something dangerous to my resolve. I crossed the kitchen quietly, the soles of my flats whispering against the tile. His coffee was already brewing, dark and bitter in the pot. I placed the pastry next to his mug. The bag still warm in my hand, no note, no explanation, just a thing I knew he liked, a fragile, quiet offering. The doorknob clicked behind me before I could turn to leave. Max stepped in, phone in one hand, brows pulled tight, his eyes landed on the counter, then on me. We didn't speak. I waited for him to say something, anything, but his expression didn't shift, not warmth, not confusion, just stillness. He reached for the croissant, thumb brushing the edge of the bag, and paused. "Thanks," he said, quiet, low. I nodded once. "It's just a pastry." But it wasn't, and we both knew it. He didn't smile, didn't move closer, but something in his gaze flickered. A breath, maybe, a hesitation, like he wanted to say more but didn't trust the words to come out clean. So I left, before hope could grow too loud in my chest. I didn't expect a grand gesture in return, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't hoped for something. A flicker, a softness in his voice, maybe even a smile. Instead, I got silence. He picked up the pastry like it was any other item on the counter, not something I'd walked 2 blocks out of my way to get, not something that had sat in my hand like a pulse. "Thanks," that was it. His voice was low, but not warm. His eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed fixed somewhere near the coffee pot, as if acknowledging me too directly might unravel him, or me. My chest tightened, a slow ache building behind my ribs. It shouldn't have mattered. We were colleagues now. I wasn't supposed to care how he said thank you or whether he looked at me when he did, but I did. God, I did, because it had meant something. That night, the way his mouth had found mine like it was familiar, the way he'd held my face like it mattered. I hadn't imagined that. But now, in this small, sterile kitchen, with fluorescent lights buzzing above and the smell of burnt coffee in the air, I felt foolish. His fingers brushed the paper bag as he pulled it toward him, careful. Like he didn't want to touch too much, like he didn't want to touch me. I stood there a second too long, waiting for, what? A second word? A look that said this matters? But Max turned slightly, already reaching for his mug, dismissing me with the kind of politeness that cuts deeper than cruelty. I should get to my desk, I mumbled. He nodded, just once, the kind of nod people give in boardrooms, not bedrooms. And that was it. I walked out before I could sink too deep into the shame. Behind me, the quiet swallowed everything. The pastry, the word, the space I'd tried to bridge. Maybe that was all it had been, a night, a mistake, a moment. And maybe I wasn't ready to admit how much I wanted it to be more. The pastry hadn't changed anything. By the time the morning meeting rolled around, the silence between Max and me had calcified into something sharp, cold, unavoidable. I took my usual seat near the end of the long, glass conference table, laptop open, notes tidy, posture calm. But under the surface, I was still reeling from his hollow thanks. Max walked in 5 minutes late. As he always did, a storm in tailored navy. He didn't glance my way. Didn't acknowledge me at all. "Let's get started." His voice was clipped, focused. One by one, ideas were tossed around the table, casual back and forths, some pushback, a few jokes. When it was my turn, I offered a marketing pivot I'd spent all night tweaking. Strategy notes, audience targeting, projected returns, clean, smart, proven. Max didn't blink. "I don't see how that adds anything new, flat, public." The room went still. Someone shifted in their chair. The air thickened. I felt my face burn, not from shame, but from anger. "I disagree," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's data-driven. It builds directly off the last campaign. We already saw a 9% uptick in engagement when I said what I said. No explanation, no logic, just ice. And the worst part? I saw it in his eyes, that flicker. That hint of something else beneath the criticism, not indifference, but control, distance for survival, mine, or his. I didn't know anymore. When the meeting ended, people shuffled out fast, avoiding the tension that still crackled between us. I waited until the room was nearly empty, then I stood. "You're overcompensating," I said quietly, my hand still resting on the back of the chair. Max didn't move. For what happened? For the fact that it wasn't just a night for either of us, no matter how hard you're trying to make it look that way. His jaw flexed. The only sign I'd hit something raw. "Be my boss," I whispered, "but don't humiliate me to protect yourself." I turned and walked out before he could respond. Heart pounding, breath shallow. The silence had finally cracked, and somewhere in the pieces, I realized, walls built too high eventually collapse, even his. I caught him in his office after hours. The floor was quiet, the kind of quiet that made your own footsteps sound like betrayal. Max was standing at the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. The city lights bathed him in gold, but his silhouette looked carved from stone. He turned when I opened the door without knocking, His eyes flicked up, sharp, guarded. Ella. I shut the door behind me. My heart was thudding, not from nerves. From need, to say something, anything, before I drowned in everything unsaid. I need to know something, I said, and I want the truth, not whatever version of cold professionalism you've been hiding behind all week. His mouth tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I stepped closer, careful not to let my voice crack. You humiliated me in that meeting, Max, not because I was wrong, but because I was me. He exhaled, looked away. Don't do that, I snapped. Don't look at the damn skyline like it's going to answer for you. Look at me. And he did, slowly, like it hurt. Why are you pushing me away? The silence between us felt different now. Not cold, but full, like it was holding its breath. I'm not, he said, but the words landed wrong, hollow. Yes, you are, I whispered. You took the pastry like it meant nothing, you dismissed my work like it didn't matter, and you keep acting like we never touched, like that night was some accident you're trying to scrub off your record. His jaw flexed. It's not that simple. No, I said, it never is. But pretending it didn't happen doesn't make it disappear. He looked torn, tired. Beautiful in the worst possible way. I can't get involved with someone who works for me, he said, finally, quiet, controlled. I nodded, swallowed. Then why do you keep looking at me like you already are? That cracked him, just a little, but enough. He didn't answer. And that silence, that beautiful, painful, honest silence, was the most truthful thing he'd given me yet. He didn't say anything for so long. I thought the silence might break me. I stood there, heart hammering, waiting. Wanting something, anything, a word, a flicker of truth. Instead, he looked at me the way he always did, like he was doing the math in his head, calculating the cost of wanting me. I almost turned to leave, almost swallowed my pride and walked out with whatever dignity I had left. But then he spoke, quiet, rough, real. Because I don't know what else to call it, Max said, voice low. When the thing I want most is the one thing I can't have. The words hit like a wave, no warning, no space to brace. I froze. It wasn't what I expected, not from him. He ran a hand through his hair, then turned away, gripping the edge of his desk like it might steady him. You think I don't feel this too? He asked. I do, every day, every time you walk past me in the office, every time I hear your voice in a meeting. My breath caught. I've spent my whole career drawing lines I promised myself I wouldn't cross. His voice cracked around the edges. And then you showed up, you. With your quiet coffee gestures and that look in your eyes like you're daring me to feel something. I didn't move. And that night, he exhaled. I've been trying to forget it ever since, not because I regret it, because I don't know how to want you and still be who I'm supposed to be. There it was. The wall I'd been banging my head against. It wasn't indifference. It was fear. He turned back to me slowly. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were tired, frustrated, full. You think I'm pushing you away because I don't care, but it's the opposite. I swallowed hard, the ache in my chest too tight to name. I want you, he said, but I don't know how to have you without losing everything else. And suddenly, I understood, not the details, not the stakes, but the feeling, the terrible, beautiful truth of wanting something so much it scared you. The late afternoon sun slipped away behind the city skyline, leaving the office bathed in the pale blue light of fluorescent bulbs. The usual hum of the building had quieted, and the only sounds were the clicking of keyboards and the occasional clearing of throats. Max sat rigid at his desk, fingers poised over the keyboard but not typing. Across the room, I pushed back my chair with a barely audible scrape and moved to sit beside him, the air between us taut and fragile. We were trapped together by the project deadline, a forced proximity neither of us seemed ready to admit was more than professional. I could feel the weight of his presence, that magnetic pull I was supposed to ignore. It was impossible. I shifted awkwardly, hands folded in my lap. The staff kitchen incident earlier echoed in my mind, the pastry, his polite thanks, the cold distance in his eyes. I wanted to reach out again, to bridge that gap, but the fear of rejection still clenched tight in my chest. Max didn't look at me, his jaw tightened as he scrolled through the presentation slides, the harsh glow reflecting off his sharp cheekbones. I noticed how his sleeve slipped slightly, revealing a glimpse of skin, something so small, yet it stirred a familiar ache. Did you get a chance to review the data from last week's survey? I asked softly, voice barely above a whisper. The question was practical, but the way I said it carried everything I was afraid to say outright. He nodded once, eyes still glued to the screen. Yes, it's incomplete. We'll need more to make a solid case. His tone was clipped, professional. But under it, I sensed a struggle, a tightness like he was holding something back. I swallowed hard. Maybe we could go over it together? I think we work better when we're in sync. His fingers paused, For a moment, I thought he might look up, meet my eyes. But he didn't. Instead, his lips curved into a half-smile, more a twitch, really, before he said, "Sure, if it helps." The words sounded easy, but the silence that followed was anything but. The space between us felt colder now, yet somehow more charged. We sat side by side, the distance in inches but the gap in emotions miles wide. Every so often, our arms brushed, brief, accidental touches that sent sparks through me and yet passed without acknowledgement. I wondered if he felt it too, the quiet pull beneath the surface, or if it was just my heart playing tricks. I caught myself staring at the black leather jacket draped over the back of my chair, the one he left behind that night. It was a small, stubborn reminder that what happened between us wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was real, tangled up in messy hopes and complicated desires. Max cleared his throat. "We should focus," he muttered. I nodded, biting my lip, pretending this was just work was becoming its own kind of pain. But for now, that was all we could do, hide behind professionalism, while everything unsaid simmered dangerously close to the surface. And somewhere deep inside me, despite the cold distance, I knew I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. The silence in the conference room had stretched so long it felt like it might crack. Max was beside me again, a presence so solid and silent it made the air buzz. We'd been at this table for over an hour, reviewing design notes and campaign briefs, but every word exchanged had been filtered through a thin veil of forced professionalism, polite, efficient, distant, like nothing had ever happened. I reached across the table, fingers aiming for the thick folder we needed next. At the exact same moment, his hand moved toward it too. We touched, just skin against skin, a graze, really, the tips of his fingers brushing against mine as our hands collided over cheap manila paper. But it hit like lightning. My breath caught, so did his. We both froze, like the world around us had tilted slightly off balance and no one had warned us. I didn't move my hand right away, neither did he. We just lingered. For a moment, I let myself look at him, really look, not the composed executive who signed off on budgets or reviewed ad concepts like they were weapons, but the man who once pressed me against a balcony railing at a beach resort with salt on his skin and fire in his kiss, the man who whispered my name like a confession into the hollow of my throat. And now, here we were, fingers barely touching, pretending it meant nothing. Max was still staring at our hands when he finally spoke. "Sorry," the word came out hoarse, like it cost him something. "It's okay," I said quietly, but it wasn't. I slowly pulled my hand back. The folder stayed untouched between us. He didn't move, but I saw the twitch in his jaw, like he wanted to say something else, maybe needed to, but didn't know how. That touch said everything his silence refused to. It wasn't just me. And even though he'd built up all these walls, the clipped responses, the cold distance, the polite smiles, his hand had betrayed him. It had lingered. It remembered. I looked down at the table, heart pounding. The same heart that had tried so hard to protect itself, and now, it only whispered one thing. He felt it too, and that was somehow more terrifying than if he hadn't. I didn't turn on the lights when I got home. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the city below my windows and the echo of silence still clinging to my skin. The kind that had followed me since the moment Max's fingers brushed mine. That accidental, impossible moment. I dropped my keys onto the entryway table, the metallic clink louder than it should have been. Shrugging out of my blazer, I let it fall across the back of the chair, and then, as if pulled by muscle memory, I reached for his jacket. It was still draped where I'd left it, slung carelessly over the edge of the armchair, like it belonged here, like he did. I hesitated, then I slipped it on. It was too big, swallowing me whole, but warm in all the ways I didn't want to admit I needed. The lining still held the faintest trace of his scent. Something dark and clean, like salt and smoke in summer. The same scent that clung to the sheets after that night. That one night I'd spent months trying to pretend didn't mean anything. My hands slipped into the pockets, my fingers curling tightly around the lining, grounding myself in a version of him I didn't have to explain or decode. Here, in the dim hush of my apartment, there was no guarded silence. No polite smiles in the office kitchen, no folders passed like fragile weapons in boardrooms. There was just this jacket, this ache, this truth. I wanted him. God, I still wanted him. Not just the version of him I had on the balcony, or the one who kissed me like he was afraid he'd never get the chance again, but the complicated, emotionally barricaded man who stood across from me every day pretending not to feel what I knew he felt. He touched me like it meant something, and maybe he didn't know what to do with that, but I did. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet, but I didn't take the jacket off, and somewhere deep in my chest, a decision began to form, quiet but certain. I wasn't going to keep pretending either, not anymore. The hallway was empty. quiet in that after-hours kind of way that made every sound echo too loud and every silence feel deliberate. I hadn't meant to see him, I hadn't planned this. But there he was, standing outside the conference room with his phone in hand, sleeves pushed up, eyes distant, something about the curve of his shoulder in the low light pulled me forward before my thoughts could stop me. We hadn't spoken since the kitchen, since the pastry, since his fingers grazed mine and froze the air between us. Now we stood alone again, and this time, he didn't walk away. Late night? I asked, my voice soft, like I didn't want to scare off whatever fragile thing had settled between us. His gaze lifted slowly. Could ask you the same, I shrugged, stepping closer, the heel of my boot brushing the carpet. Guess I couldn't sleep. Max looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted. The walls I'd gotten used to, the practiced detachment in his face, flickered. For a breath, he seemed tired, unguarded, human. His eyes dropped to my mouth, and my heart stuttered. Neither of us moved. I could feel the air pull tighter between us, the weight of all the things we hadn't said pressing closer than his body ever did. He stepped in, just enough for me to feel the warmth of him, just enough for his cologne to drown out rational thought. My breath caught. Max leaned down, his hand lifting, then stopping, suspended in the space between want and permission. His fingers hovered near my cheek, trembling with hesitation I hadn't seen in him before. I shouldn't, he whispered. The words hurt more than I expected, but I didn't move, I didn't beg, I didn't break. I know, I said, quiet as a confession, and then he stepped back, not far, just enough. Enough to leave me cold in the place he'd almost touched. I let the silence stretch between us like a fault line, and I nodded, once, before turning away. I didn't look back, but I didn't need to. I could still feel him, like heat from a flame that never quite caught fire. Cassie didn't look up when I sank onto the bar stool beside her, but I saw the way her eyes flicked toward me in the mirror behind the bar, the kind of glance that said, talk or don't, but I know something's eating you alive. It was past 9, we were the last ones in the quiet wine bar on Main, the kind of place with dim lighting and flickering candles on every table, like they were trying to coax the truth out of people. I'm seeing someone, I said. The words dropped between us, soft but solid, like I'd finally let something out of a locked box. Cassie blinked once, then set her wine glass down. Is this the kind of seeing someone that comes with regret, or the kind that comes with hope? I laughed, but it cracked on the edges, both. She turned to face me. Okay, spill. I hesitated, then took a breath. It's Max. Silence. Not the kind that's empty, the kind that fills a room. The Max? She asked, as in, you're Max. I nodded. One night at that beach resort, I didn't know who he was. It was supposed to be easy, a fling, but now, you work for him. Yeah. I stared at the melting ice in my untouched drink, and I can't stop thinking about him, but he's so closed off. It's like every time I try to reach for something real, he pulls away. Is he cruel? She asked, voice gentle. No, that's the thing. He's not. He's careful, controlled, like he's afraid to want anything. Cassie leaned closer. And you? Are you afraid to want him? I think I already do, I whispered, and that terrifies me, because I've been here before, falling for someone who can't give me what I need, but this time, I swallowed, this time it feels different. Like I'm not just falling for the idea of him, I'm falling for the quiet parts, the silences, even the way he pulls away. Cassie's smile was soft. That sounds a lot like love, Ella. I looked down at my hands. I'm not ready to call it that, but you just did. And in the stillness that followed, I knew she was right. Naming it didn't fix it, but it made it real. The office was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows like it had something to say. I had barely touched my coffee, too bitter, like everything lately, when I noticed the folder sitting on the corner of my desk. I hadn't left it there. It was one of the company's standard manila files, the kind used for internal proposals, but it wasn't the file itself that made my chest tighten. It was the pale yellow sticky note stuck to the front, written in the sharp, slanted handwriting I'd already memorized. You were right, that was all it said. 3 words, no name, no context, no explanation, but I knew who it was from. I stared at it for a long time, like maybe if I looked long enough, I'd hear the words he hadn't said. He hadn't met my eyes since the night I brought him the pastry. I had tried, quietly, cautiously, to show I still cared, but he'd closed the door without slamming it, just left me standing there in the space between what we'd shared and what we couldn't talk about. And now, this, a note, a whisper where a conversation should have been. I opened the folder. Inside was a document draft I'd mentioned during a meeting last week, something I hadn't expected anyone, least of all him, to follow up on. But there it was, reviewed, annotated, and finalized, thoughtfully, thoroughly, like he'd been listening, like he remembered. The words on the sticky note weren't much, but they carried the weight of something unspoken between us, an acknowledgement, maybe, a quiet apology, or maybe it was the beginning of something else entirely. I ran my fingers over the note, letting the texture catch on the ridges of my skin. It wasn't grand, it wasn't a gesture anyone else would notice, but it was his, and in its quiet, it said more than anything else could have. Maybe Max Kane didn't know how to say what he felt, maybe he didn't even know how to feel it, but this was something, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe that maybe I hadn't imagined it all. The rooftop terrace was strung with soft, golden lights, flickering against the velvet dusk. Laughter floated around me like perfume, warm, familiar, too easy to get lost in. People smiled, glasses clinked, and the scent of summer, salt air, citrus, and champagne, hung in the air like a promise. But I barely noticed any of it, because across the terrace, just beyond a half-circle of executives in curated charm, stood Max, in a navy suit that looked unfairly good on him and a drink he hadn't touched. He was still somehow the quietest person in the room, not because he didn't speak, but because he didn't need to. His presence carried weight, even when he stood in shadow. I hadn't expected him to come tonight, not really, especially not after the note. You were right. It had replayed in my head since the moment I found it, short, careful, and completely maddening. It meant something, I just didn't know what. But now, with one glance across the rooftop, I felt it again, that pull, soft and sudden, like gravity had shifted just enough to lean me toward him. I didn't look away, and this time, neither did he. His eyes found mine through the crowd, steady and unblinking. There wasn't heat in them, not the kind I remembered from that night on the beach, when his mouth had left bruises shaped like meat along my skin. No, this was quieter, a kind of searching, like he saw me, and maybe for the first time, wanted to be seen, too. The noise around us dimmed, a breeze lifted my hair from my shoulders, and I felt suddenly exposed. Like the moment had peeled something raw open between us. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, but he stayed. That was new. He held my gaze for a heartbeat too long, then another, and just as someone stepped into my line of sight, the corner of his mouth tipped, the barest curve, there and gone. But it was enough. Enough to say I'm still here, enough to say don't walk away yet, and for the first time in a long time. I didn't want to. The party was over, the rooftop lights were dimmed, the laughter fading into memory, and my heels clicked too loudly against the empty hallway floor. I hadn't meant to stay this late, but something in the way he looked at me earlier, really looked, had loosened something tight in my chest, and I needed air, or closure, or just something. The office was quiet, humming low with after-hours stillness. I turned the corner into the open workspace, and there he was, Max, alone. At his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the light from his monitor casting soft shadows over his face. He didn't notice me at first, or maybe he did, and he was pretending not to. Either way, the weight in my chest pushed me forward before I could talk myself out of it. Why do you keep doing this? His head lifted, slowly, his eyes met mine, calm, unreadable. Doing what? This, I said, motioning vaguely between us. The avoiding, the silence, that look you give me when you think I'm not watching, like you're holding your breath. He stood, but didn't move closer. I kept going. You act like that night didn't mean anything, like it was just a mistake, but then you leave notes on my desk, or hold my gaze across a room, and it feels like something, and I don't know what to do with that. My voice didn't rise. I wasn't crying, but I felt cracked open all the same. I don't need you to fix it, Max. I just need to know what's real and what's not, because if it was just a night to you, if that's all this ever was, then say it. I'll walk away. He was quiet, his jaw clenched once, then relaxed. I tried to pretend it didn't matter. He said finally, voice low, but I can't stop thinking about you. The words landed like a drop of ink in water, quiet, spreading through me in slow, dizzying ripples. No clever follow-up, no defense, just that one, vulnerable truth. I stood frozen, breath catching in my throat. Because once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it, and you can't take back what your heart does in the silence that follows. The silence between us wasn't empty, it pulsed, thick and waiting. I didn't move, couldn't. He was still standing by his desk, the city lights behind him casting long shadows across the floor. My confession was still hanging between us, that raw, trembling need to know what this was. And he'd given me one sentence. I can't stop thinking about you. It should have been enough. For most people, maybe it would have been, but Max Kane wasn't most people. He was all locked doors and iron will, a man who wore silence like armor. I took a breath, just to steady the quiver in my voice. Then why do you keep pushing me away? He looked down at his hands, then back at me, like it hurt to meet my eyes. But he forced himself to anyway. His voice came quiet, but there was a sharp edge to it, like a dam cracking, not breaking, but close. You think this is easy for me? I blinked. He stepped around the desk, slowly, until he was just a few feet away. I haven't let someone in, really in, for years, not since. He stopped himself, exhaled. You come into my life like a storm I never saw coming, and suddenly, I'm not in control anymore. I don't know how to be around you and not want more. The words weren't perfect, they weren't rehearsed, but they were real. His jaw clenched like he wanted to pull them back, to rebuild the wall faster than I could slip through it. But I was already through. I could feel it, the shift. Not a grand gesture, just a man finally letting himself feel something he didn't plan for. I stepped closer, close enough to see the strain behind his stillness, the effort it took not to retreat. You don't have to have all the answers, Max, I said softly. You just have to stop pretending like you don't feel anything. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away, either, and somehow, that felt like the bravest thing he'd done. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was Saturday morning, the kind of hazy, slow morning I usually guarded like a secret. Warm socks, loose t-shirt, no makeup, coffee brewed just the way I liked it. The quiet was my armor, and after the week I'd had, after him, I needed the stillness. So when the knock came, soft but insistent, I froze mid-pour. I wasn't sure why my heart started racing. Maybe I already knew. I padded barefoot to the door, hesitant, cautious, but when I opened it, all that quiet I'd wrapped around myself shattered. Max Kane stood there, looking out of place in a hoodie and jeans, his hair mussed like he hadn't bothered to tame it. He looked real, and holding out a paper coffee cup. My coffee, exactly how I like it, dark roast, splash of oat milk, 2 sugars. I stared at it, then at him. You're here. He nodded once, like it was the most he could offer. Didn't know what to say. He murmured, but I remembered this. That morning in the break room flashed back. The one where I handed him a stupid pastry just to feel close to him. He hadn't even looked at me. But now, here he was, standing at my door, holding this out like it meant something, like I meant something. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. He didn't say sorry. But I saw it in the way he held the cup, not offering it too fast, like he wasn't sure I'd take it. I saw it in the way his shoulders were tight with effort, like every small act was a mountain. And maybe it wasn't the coffee, maybe it was the fact that he remembered, that he showed up. Quietly. Awkwardly, with no speech, no charm, just a cup of coffee and eyes that looked like they'd been awake all night. I reached out and took it, our fingers brushed, and he didn't pull away. Thank you, I said softly. He looked down, then back at me. I'm trying, Ella. That was all he said, and he didn't need to say more, because in that one small gesture, in showing up here, in remembering something that mattered only because it mattered to me, he was saying everything I hadn't been sure he felt. Something inside me loosened, not all the way, but enough to let a little warmth in. I almost didn't get in the elevator. The doors had already started to close when I caught sight of him, Max, standing inside, alone, one hand braced on the rail, the other hanging at his side like he didn't know what to do with it. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and for once, he didn't look away. My breath caught. My feet moved on instinct, closing the distance before my brain could catch up. The doors opened again without a sound, and I stepped in, careful not to stand too close, careful not to expect anything. We stood in silence. The air between us wasn't tense anymore. Not exactly. It was something else now, thicker, softer, like the space between inhale and exhale, like the way you hold your breath when you're waiting for something you're not sure you'll get. The lights flicked gently above us, the elevator humming a low, steady sound as it descended. I stared straight ahead. He shifted beside me. I could feel the heat of him, just a whisper away, and then, without fanfare, without a single word spoken, his hand brushed mine, not by accident, not in passing, but lingering, slow, intentional. Our fingers didn't lock. It wasn't that kind of moment, but he didn't pull away. He just stayed, and I let myself feel it, the weight of his hand, the quiet of his presence, the unspoken apology laced in skin meeting skin. It was the first time since that night, our night, that he'd touched me without it being part of a retreat, without building a wall around it. It was nothing, it was everything. My pulse stuttered. I didn't look at him. I couldn't, because if I did, I might break the spell, or worse, read too much into something that could still disappear like smoke between us. But I didn't move away either. I let him be there, let his warmth soak into the cold places I hadn't admitted were still aching. Let it mean something, even if I didn't know what, yet. When the elevator dinged, he let go, but the feeling didn't. It stayed with me all day. That subtle, seismic shift, that touch without words. Like maybe, he was learning how to speak my language, too. The ocean was quieter at night, even with the resort lights behind me and the hum of distant music from a beach bar. The sound of the waves had its own kind of hush, like the world finally stopped talking long enough for me to hear myself think. I walked barefoot along the wet sand, the hem of my jeans damp from an earlier wave I hadn't bothered to dodge. The wind caught the ends of my hair, whipping them against my cheek in soft, salt-laced lashes, but I didn't mind. It felt honest out here, unfiltered. It felt like I could finally breathe. The elevator touch, the not pulling away, had been nothing and everything, all at once, just skin against skin, just a quiet, human thing. But it rattled something in me, something I'd tried to keep neatly contained behind ambition, sarcasm, and a very well-practiced indifference. And now? Now I couldn't stop thinking about the way it felt, how warm his hand was, how he didn't flinch, how he stayed. I paused near a weathered wooden bench half buried in the dunes. Max probably wouldn't have picked this spot, too exposed, too simple. But I sat anyway, curling my legs under me, watching the tide roll in and out like it had secrets it didn't want to keep. It reminded me of him, and, if I was being honest, it reminded me of me. I used to come out here with Josh, my ex. It was always the same. He'd make some big, romantic promise. How he'd stop bailing on dinner, how he'd be better, and then a week later, the cycle would start again, apologies wrapped in flowers, distance disguised as space, touch without substance. But I had wanted so badly to believe in it. In him, I used to think love was about waiting for the other person to change. Enduring the cold spells because the heat, when it came, felt like proof of something real. But Max wasn't making promises. He wasn't trying to win me over with words. Instead, he gave me silence, hesitation, a hand that didn't let go. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was begging for scraps. I felt like maybe, we were both trying to learn how to want something without breaking it in the process. Maybe that's what made him different. Not perfect, just present. I pressed my thumb into the sand beside me, drawing nothing in particular. Circles, mostly, loops that went nowhere, like the old pattern I was finally ready to step out of. Because I wasn't the girl I used to be. I didn't need grand gestures. I didn't want someone who knew exactly what to say. I just wanted someone who was still there when the moment turned quiet. Someone who didn't flinch when things got real. And maybe, just maybe, Max was learning how to stay. I closed my eyes, let the breeze kiss my skin, and exhaled. No more waiting for the other person to choose me. This time, I was choosing myself, and I wasn't afraid of where that might lead anymore. The boardroom emptied in pieces, laughter echoing too loud, shoes clicking on tile, polite nods exchanged like currency. I stayed seated a beat longer than I needed to, gathering papers that didn't really need gathering. I just needed the room to clear, to breathe. Max had barely looked at me during the meeting, which wasn't unusual. He kept his voice cool and clipped, his gaze sharp and distant. I'd grown used to his walls, even if they still scraped when I brushed against them. But ever since that night on the beach, and especially after the way his hand hadn't pulled away in the elevator, something had shifted, quietly, slowly, like a tide changing directions without announcing itself. I stepped into the hallway, the low light outside casting everything in gold. It caught on the edges of glass and metal, softened the sharp corners of the world. That's when I felt him behind me, not close, just there, present, the way he always had this ability to fill a space without making a sound. I didn't turn around, didn't speak. I just kept walking toward the window at the end of the hallway, the one that faced the ocean. A sliver of it shimmered through the glass, the sun dipping lower than it had been just minutes before, and for some reason, that little strip of horizon felt like a lifeline. Then I heard him, just one step behind, and then beside me. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, close, but not too close, hands in his pockets, shoulders loose. A full, quiet minute passed. Then his voice, low, rougher than usual, broke the silence. You calm the room when you walk in. I don't think anyone else notices it, but I do. That was it. No charm, no strategy, just the kind of truth that doesn't ask for anything in return. I turned my head just slightly, met his eyes. Something warm flickered there. Not fire, not yet, just the first spark. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was standing in front of a wall. I felt like maybe, just maybe, a door had been left open, even just a crack. And God, how good the air felt coming through. The office after hours was an entirely different world, hushed, slow, almost kind. The fluorescent ceiling lights had dimmed to a low glow, casting long, sleepy shadows over the furniture. Outside the windows, the sky bled into dusk, soft pink trailing into deeper blue. The ocean barely visible in the distance. I was still at my desk, lingering again. It had become a habit lately, though I told myself it was work. Truth was, I liked the stillness. I liked not having to brace myself every time I heard his footsteps down the hall. Tonight, though, he didn't pass by. He stopped. Max leaned in the doorway like it was easy. Like we hadn't spent weeks navigating around each other with stiff silence and heavy glances. He held a paper bag in one hand, 2 soda cans tucked under his arm. I figured you didn't eat either, he said quietly. No push, no agenda, just a fact between us. I nodded, and he walked in. We didn't talk much after that. He cleared the files from his table and laid out takeout containers between us. Thai, I think. I barely tasted it. Not because it wasn't good, but because the way his shoulders dropped as he sat across from me did something strange to my chest. I hadn't seen him look that at ease, not since the beach. He smiled once. Soft, sudden, like it slipped out before he could catch it. It was over something small I said about my terrible attempt at surfing that weekend, and then he laughed, not the sharp, polished one I'd heard in meetings. This one was quieter, warmer, like he forgot to guard it. Something shifted in that moment. Not in the air, but in me. My stomach didn't knot like it usually did around him. Instead, I felt this unfamiliar lightness, like the tension that used to press between us had decided to take the night off. I didn't reach for his hand. He didn't brush my arm. There were no touches, no lines crossed. Just dinner, just laughter, just the gentle, steady return of something that had been gone for too long, ease. And when he stood to leave, he paused, looked at me, not with the weight he used to carry, but with something quieter, something like peace. Then he nodded once and left, and I sat there, smiling at nothing, the room still holding the shape of him. We were finishing dinner when the quiet settled in, that soft, familiar kind. Not awkward, not strained, just still. Outside his office window, the city shimmered against the dark sky, but in here, the world had gone dim and private, just 2 people sitting across from each other, like we weren't boss and employee, or ex-lovers trying to pretend we'd never been anything else. He was leaning back in his chair now, sleeves rolled up, his tie draped across the desk like he'd forgotten it existed. There was a half-empty container of pad thai between us, the edges of his fingers still flecked with sauce. I should have let the silence stay, should have tucked the moment in and left it intact. But my chest was full, and full things spill. I missed you, I said, barely above a whisper. The words didn't crash or ripple, they just landed, gently, like they'd been waiting in the room all along. Max didn't move at first, didn't speak. He blinked once, slow, his gaze found mine across the table. And something there softened, not enough to name, but enough to feel, like ice melting beneath skin, like recognition. He didn't say it back, I didn't expect him to, but his fingers curled inward, like he was trying to hold on to the moment, and his eyes looked at me like he wanted to say everything he couldn't, or maybe everything he wasn't ready to. A breath passed between us, then another. He reached forward, not for my hand, but for the crumpled napkin near mine. His knuckles brushed my wrist, not intentional, not performative, just skin on skin, but my body lit up like it remembered every place he'd ever touched me, not in lust, this time, in longing. When he stood, I thought the spell would break, but instead, he walked to my side of the table, and paused. Not a word, just that look again, and then he bent, slow and steady, like gravity had finally won. His mouth found mine, no heat, no urgency, just a kiss, soft, certain, real. The kind you don't give unless something inside you is shifting, the kind you don't forget. The hallway was quiet, not the sterile kind of silence offices usually have at night, but something softer, like the air had shifted, like it knew we'd just crossed some invisible line back in his office, somewhere between laughter and confession, between a shared container of noodles and the way he looked at me when I said I missed you. Max walked beside me as we left, his steps unhurried, one hand brushing lightly against the wall like he was grounding himself. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, not after the way his lips had met mine, careful, almost reverent, a kiss that asked more than it took. When we reached the end of the corridor, I turned to say goodnight. He didn't. He stopped, and then, slowly, he stepped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat rolling off him, close enough that if I leaned forward, just a breath, I'd fall right into him. For a moment, he just looked at me, not the way a boss looks at his assistant, not like someone calculating risks, but like a man who's trying to memorize a moment. His eyes flicked down to my mouth, then back up, and then he kissed me, not like that first time, not wild and burning, desperate to forget who we were. This kiss was slower, like he wanted to remember, like he'd been holding this in since the day I walked into his office and changed everything. His hands didn't grip, they hovered, then rested gently on my waist, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to hold on, but needed to anyway. I didn't pull away. I didn't question. My fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, just enough to feel the beat of his heart underneath, fast, real, and for once, I didn't think about tomorrow, about complications, about office walls or who we had to be when the sun came up, right here, in this quiet corner of a building that had been full of tension and denial for weeks. Max kissed me like he didn't want to be anywhere else, and for the first time since that night at the beach, I let myself believe maybe this wasn't just a fling. He didn't ask to come in, he didn't have to. By the time we reached my apartment, the kiss still lingering like a half-finished sentence between us, the quiet had turned warm, no longer heavy with questions or restraint, just full of something slower, softer, safe. I pushed the door open and let him follow me inside. There was a moment, just one, where I stood by the kitchen and watched him take in the space, not like a man analyzing or calculating, but like someone trying to understand what kind of world I'd let him step into. The jacket he'd left weeks ago still hung over the back of the chair. He glanced at it, then at me, his mouth curved, just barely. He remembered. So did I. The last time we were alone like this, it was all fire. Skin on skin, reckless, desperate, unforgettable. But this time felt different. There was no rush, no pretense, just the quiet way he stepped close, brushed my hair back from my face, and kissed me like he had all night to figure me out. And he did. Every touch was a question asked and answered, every laugh we shared, tangled in sheets and half-whispers, carved a deeper space between us. He held me like he didn't need to prove anything, like he just wanted to be with me. No walls, no masks, no guilt. At some point, my head found the crook of his shoulder, his fingers tracing slow circles over my hip. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. I felt his breath against my temple, steady and close, and instead of wondering what it meant or where it was going, I let myself be in it. No running, no pretending, no telling myself this was a mistake. Just warmth, just him, just us. When I woke later, tangled in sheets that smelled like both of us, he was still there, asleep beside me, hand resting lightly against my spine, like his body hadn't learned how to let go yet. And maybe, neither had mine, but for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of wanting more, because this, whatever we were building, didn't feel like falling, it felt like landing. I found it after he left, folded neatly, almost deliberately, over the back of the same chair. The jacket, his jacket, the same one he'd left behind after that first night, the night that changed everything. Though I spent weeks pretending it hadn't, I never gave it back, but I never really claimed it either. It just sat there, like a memory I wasn't ready to touch. But tonight it feels different. He didn't forget it. I know he didn't. Max Kane doesn't forget things. He's meticulous, controlled, intentional. He doesn't leave pieces of himself behind by accident. So this was on purpose. I pick it up slowly, fingertips brushing over the familiar leather. It's soft in places, worn in others. It smells like him, like salt and citrus and something deeper I can't name, and I curl into it. Not because I'm cold, but because I miss him, and this time, I'm not afraid of that. I don't try to talk myself out of it, don't push the feeling down or twist it into something easier to carry. I just sit on the edge of my bed, knees tucked up, jacket wrapped tight around me like arms I no longer have to imagine. I used to tell myself that needing someone was weakness, that wanting more was dangerous, that if I stayed untouchable, no one could disappoint me. But now I know love doesn't come crashing in. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it's quiet, a slow hand on your back, a second kiss that lingers, a jacket left behind like a promise you didn't expect but desperately want to believe. He left it for me, not as a mistake, not as a way out, but as a way in, and I think I'm ready to let him in. The boardroom felt like a glass box, all eyes, no air. I was already bracing myself before the meeting even started, the quarterly strategy pitch, senior executives. 3 potential investors, 2 from Europe, 1 from Singapore, every chair filled, every coffee poured, every mistake waiting to be noticed, and Max, sitting at the head of the table like he always did, back straight, unreadable, not my lover, not the man who left his jacket behind last night like a soft-spoken promise, just the boss. But then, he looked at me, a single glance, calm, certain, almost warm, and then he said, "Ella has the floor," just that, 4 words. I blinked, the room blinked. The lead investor, a woman in navy silk with eyes like X-rays, shifted in her seat. Someone coughed. I opened my mouth and started to speak, not because I was ready, but because I had to, because he'd just handed me the power, and I wasn't about to drop it. I talked through the rollout proposal, hit every number, every risk factor. I walked the room through my projections and didn't trip once over the lump in my throat or the surprise clenching in my chest. Max didn't interrupt, he didn't correct, he didn't take the spotlight back. He just listened, like I mattered, like what I'd built, what I'd stayed up 3 nights perfecting, was worth hearing. When I sat back down, I realized my hands were shaking, and then, applause, quiet, respectful, but real. I didn't look at him right away. I couldn't, because if I did, I might cry, and this wasn't the place for tears. But later, when I was alone in the elevator, I let myself smile. He didn't hold my hand, he didn't say, "I believe in you," he just gave me the room, and that was more than enough. Cassie didn't knock. She never did when she was worried. She just barged into my office like it was on fire, which, in a way, it was. I looked up from my screen, pretending I hadn't just been staring at the little leather tag on the back of Max's jacket, still draped over the same chair, still right where he left it. "Okay," she said, shutting the door behind her and crossing her arms. "So, are you gonna tell me? Or am I gonna have to confirm with HR?" My stomach dropped. "Tell you what?" She tilted her head. "Ella," one word, sharp, sisterly. "Sure." I didn't answer. Cassie walked over, picked up the jacket, turned it in her hands. She didn't have to say it. I could see it in her face. "She knows. You said it was a mistake," she said, voice lower now, back at the resort. "One night, nothing important." She held my gaze. "But this? This isn't nothing." I should have denied it, brushed it off, laughed. I'd done it before, but this time, something inside me didn't flinch. "It wasn't supposed to be anything," I said quietly. "But it is," Cassie exhaled, stepping back, like she wasn't sure whether to hug me or shake me. "Ella, he's your boss, I know, and he's Max Kane, that Max Kane, I know." Silence filled the space between us, not angry, just worried. Then, softer. "Is he hurting you?" I shook my head. "No, actually, he's the only one who's not." And it hit me, as I said it, not like lightning, but like warm water rising in a bath. Slow, inevitable, calm. I wasn't ashamed of loving him, not anymore. Cassie sat down across from me. She didn't say anything for a while, just nodded. "I just want you to be okay," she murmured. "I'm not," I admitted, "but I think I might be getting there." It was the first time I'd said it out loud, not just what was happening, but what it meant. The truth didn't undo the chaos, it didn't fix everything, but it felt good, like breathing, like finally being seen. The restaurant wasn't flashy, no sweeping views, no candlelit corners or private booths that screamed secrecy, just a quiet table tucked near a window, the ocean just visible in the dark beyond. Simple, intentional, like he'd chosen stillness on purpose. He didn't touch his wine, barely touched the food. "I don't usually do this," Max said, finally breaking the silence. I looked up. "Dinner?" He huffed a laugh, short, uneven. "Talk about me." His fingers traced the edge of the linen napkin, eyes flicking to mine, then away. I waited, not pushing, not rushing. He looked different here, a little less iron, a little more man, the kind of man who'd left a jacket on my chair and hadn't asked for it back. "I was engaged," he said softly. Something in my chest stilled. "She said she loved me," he continued, voice low. "Said she wanted forever, but it turned out she wanted control. Not me, just what I represented." His hand closed into a fist, then released. It wasn't just her, it was business, too, friends, people I trusted. They all blurred together until I couldn't tell who was real anymore. I didn't breathe, didn't dare interrupt the unraveling. So I built a life with walls, cold, controlled, calculated. If I didn't let anyone in, they couldn't leave, or lie. He looked up again, eyes clear now, raw, no armor. "Then you walked into my office." Same eyes I remembered from the beach, same mouth I couldn't forget, and I panicked. A pause, then, "You were the one thing I didn't prepare for, Ella." The words sat between us. Not polished, not rehearsed, just true. I reached across the table, not to grab, just to be there. His hand met mine halfway, warm, uncertain, real. And that was it. No dramatic speeches, no guarantees. Just two people, no longer pretending, no longer hiding. He shared the pain, and somehow, it felt lighter. And mine didn't feel so lonely anymore. The walk back from the restaurant was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full, stretched between two people who've run out of walls to hide behind. He didn't try to hold my hand, he didn't have to. The night breeze moved through the palm trees above us, brushing against my bare shoulders. I thought about the way he'd looked across the table earlier, vulnerable, but steady. There was something different in his eyes. Not softness, exactly, but something close. The path curved toward the beach. He followed it. And I followed him, our shoes sinking into the cool sand as we stopped just where the ocean kissed the shore. He turned to me, hands tucked into his pockets, gaze focused on the horizon like he was working up to something. "I'm not good at saying things the way people want to hear them," he said, voice low. "You probably figured that out." I smiled. I got the hint. A pause. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. "I don't know if I believe in forever the way people talk about it," he said, "but I know this much. I don't want to imagine doing any of this without you." My chest tightened, not in panic, but in recognition, because he wasn't the type to promise forever, not with flowers or fireworks, but this? This was his version of "I love you," and for the first time, I didn't need more. That fear I'd clung to, the idea that it would all fall apart if I didn't keep it controlled, contained, safe, it faded, right there on the sand, with his words still hanging in the salt air. I let it go. I'd spent so long trying to protect my heart, I almost missed the fact that it had already chosen him. He stepped closer, and I didn't flinch. I leaned in, not for a kiss, not for heat, but for the quiet contact of two people finally getting it right. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. Because sometimes, the one thing you need to hear isn't "I love you," it's "I see you, I choose you." And Max had finally said it. In his way, the conference room buzzed with energy, industry partners, media, every executive from the board. All of them here for the launch. I'd rehearsed this presentation 100 times, maybe more. But this time, it didn't feel like I was performing. It felt like I belonged. I smoothed the front of my blazer, stepped onto the low platform at the front of the room, and found my place behind the podium. The screen behind me glowed with the opening slide. My palms didn't sweat. I didn't check to see if Max had arrived. I just began. The future of sustainable design isn't about perfection. It's about intention, about building something that lasts. My voice was steady, clear. I saw a few nods from the crowd, a scribble of notes. Someone whispered something and smiled. Then, halfway through, a shift in the room, a subtle one, like something had settled. I glanced up. He was there. Max stood at the back, near the doors, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed. He didn't look like the cold CEO I met that first Monday. He looked calm, present. He didn't nod. He didn't smile too wide. But when our eyes met, his gaze didn't waver. Pride, not the kind that shouts, the kind that waits. It was enough. I finished the pitch, fielded the questions, watched the heads tilt in approval. When I stepped down, people clapped, some even stood. But the applause wasn't what made my chest ache. It was the way he stayed in the background, letting me own it, letting me stand alone. I passed him by on the way out. He didn't stop me, just leaned in slightly and murmured, "You were brilliant," 3 words. But this time, I didn't need more, because the woman who once grabbed a pastry just to be near him, the one who trembled at the thought of falling, wasn't the woman walking out of that room. This woman? She knew what she wanted, she knew what she deserved, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to claim it. 2 coffee mugs side by side in the break room, his jacket draped over the chair behind her desk, a glance, a breath, not an ending, just a beginning. I used to think I had to prove something, that if I stood perfectly still, said everything just right, no one would see how scared I really was, how alone. But today, I just wanted to show them the work. The conference room was already half full when I stepped in. Sleek suits, hushed murmurs, the glint of phone cameras catching early slides. My heart should have been pounding, my hands should have trembled. Instead, I breathed, and began. "This isn't just a launch," I said, "it's a shift, toward intention, sustainability, and design that dares to last." I spoke like the words had always been mine, like I knew who I was. And halfway through, just as the second slide clicked in behind me, I felt him, Max. I didn't have to look to know. His presence was like pressure behind glass, still, steady, unshakable. When I finally turned, just for a breath, our eyes met. No nod, no smirk, but something deeper. He saw me, not the woman. From that night on the beach, skin lit by moonlight and nothing but bad timing, not the new hire trying not to fall apart under his gaze, just me, standing in the light I built with my own 2 hands. He stayed the whole time, didn't interrupt, didn't interfere. When the applause started, I didn't scan the crowd for his reaction, I already knew. But as I stepped down, passing near where he stood at the back, he leaned in just slightly, just enough. "You were brilliant," he said, quiet and certain. 3 words, no more. But I didn't need more, not now, because I wasn't waiting for his approval anymore. I wasn't chasing his gaze, or his affection, or the version of myself I thought he wanted. I was already enough, and still, he was here. The room emptied, the light softened, I gathered my notes, and when I turned to leave, I felt the warmth of his hand brush gently against mine, not grabbing, not pulling, just reaching, walking with me, not ahead, not behind, beside me. We ended up back on the beach, not because we planned it, but because some places pull you in when you're finally ready to see them for what they are. It was quieter than I remembered. The ocean wasn't performing tonight, just breathing, soft and steady, like it had nothing left to prove. Neither did I. Max walked beside me, hands tucked into his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them, like he was still learning how to exist without holding the world together. I didn't speak, not at first. We walked where the tide kissed the shore, our footsteps side by side in the damp sand. It felt like a memory, except this time, I wasn't afraid of where it would lead. I wasn't waiting for him to disappear, and maybe that was the difference, because that first night, everything about him had felt impossible, too much, too perfect, too dangerous. Now, he just felt real, tired, kind, human. I keep thinking about that first night, I said quietly, letting the words stretch between us like a thread. How I wanted to forget it before it even ended. Max glanced at me, his eyes unreadable in the moonlight. And now? I don't want to forget any of it, I whispered, even the messy parts. He didn't reach for my hand, he didn't kiss me, he just slowed, stopped, and turned to face me fully, like I was worth pausing for. You still scare me, Ella, he said, voice low. But that's not a reason to run anymore. I nodded, heart steady, because I knew, love wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a sweeping declaration under fireworks or some perfectly choreographed scene in a movie. It was this, a quiet night, two people walking side by side, no promises, no scripts, just showing up, again and again. I looked down at our feet, our footprints stayed, even as the waves reached for them. This time, we didn't run. The jacket's still on the chair, same spot, same fold across the backrest, but now, I don't stare at it like it's a question. Now, it's just there, like it belongs. Max is in the kitchen, my kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pouring coffee into two mismatched mugs. He doesn't ask which one I want, he just knows. I curl my legs under me on the couch and watch him for a moment, not in that cautious, calculating way I used to, just watching, quietly amazed that this is real, that he's here. There's no dramatic music, no passionate monologue, just the sound of a spoon clinking gently against porcelain, and the low hum of a man who stopped pretending he wasn't in love. He brings the mug to me without a word, fingers brushing mine, that's all, but it lands harder than any speech ever could. I smile, he does too, a small one, the kind that says, we made it through the hard part. Later, when he heads into the other room to take a call, I gather the scattered throw blankets and straighten the cushions. My hand pauses on the jacket. For a second, I think about finally giving it back. But I don't. I smooth the collar, then fold it neatly and drape it back over the chair. It's not that I need it for comfort anymore, it's that I don't. He's not leaving, and even if he did, I wouldn't be undone by it, not anymore, because I've learned something in all this chaos, something I didn't want to admit until now. Love isn't safe, it's not tidy, it doesn't follow rules or wait until you're ready. But when you stop trying to control it, when you let it breathe, it grows into something solid, something worth the mess. I sit down with my coffee, jacket behind me, and the scent of him still in the air. He walks back in, and I meet his eyes, no fear, no distance, just this moment, just us, and I think to myself, I used to think love was something to control, something you could keep in a box, but now, I know, it's something you have to let run wild if you want to hold on to it.